Sari Carel. Thank you so much for joining me at Artists Talk, a podcast by KODA. We've known each other for several years now, and we've worked together at your Land and Environment Residency at KODA in 2021, presenting City of Trees, commissioning A More Perfect Circle in 2024. And I'm wondering, how did your work evolve across all those years?
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I'm so happy to be here. So if I think about these two pieces, which were both, fostered in the Coda environment, I think there's an interesting organic connection between them. One of the things that was great about working with Coda is that is truly an artist-led environment in terms of the project. So those projects in some ways are very similar, in some ways kind of veered widely from each other. City of Trees was a project that I worked on that engaged with the urban forest and the trees that we share New York City with, millions of trees. Um, and I wanted to really kind of pay some attention to these trees and spend some time with them, trees that cool our air and give us shade on really hot summer days, but also mitigate storm surges, which is our real concern in the city. So these are, they really make a difference to life in the city, aside from the fact that they're, beautiful and marvelous, but they really kind of affect like how do we live here? How do we continue managing to live here? And yet these are trees that city block trees are trees that we walk by every day when we go to work or school, walk by when we come back home and rush back to our kids or to our other things that we want to do or as we are away to our friends. And for this project, I actually want them to be the destination, that this is where we would be going to. We were going to visit these trees, and I was going to visit these trees. You remember sometimes we would talk on the phone, and I'd be like, "I'm here, looking at this tree," or "I'm in this neighborhood or this borough." That was very much part of the process. The series itself is a large series of cyanotypes, handmade, which I printed. Still, it's open, so I'm still working on it. But I print them on city streets. I work outside. I print them with the sun. It's very much connected to the environment, the urban environment, and the weather and the seasons. Um, and they are based on the interactive tree map of the Parks Department of the trees in New York City. So it's a map that's constantly kind of changing and growing and changing and breathing, and because trees grow, die, are being planted. Um, and on the other hand, in the project, there is this element of map making and online mapping. But the second register of it is the actual walking and being in the city with your body and visiting those trees. So sitting in that place, it was also really important for me that the project has a public engagement element. And so we developed that art making, well, tree care and art making workshop with Trees New York. And it was really important for me that this would take place outside where those trees live and where they grow. And so we ended up doing that on the block outside of 5 Miles Gallery, where the exhibition was going to take place. Um, and that was like a intergenerational workshop for people, for New Yorkers of all ages, and it had that kind of, very open-ended, exuberant feel to it throughout as we were, caring for learning how to care for trees, caring for the trees around us on that block, and then using the same materials as materials of care, as materials to make art and be creative and play. Um, the commons and care and their relationship to art is something that's very much at the center of this project. And A More Perfect Circle, which we started talking about while I was doing the residency, so it has that connection too. Is a project that kind of infuses this idea of care, commons, and art making, um, from its very kind of the DNA of the piece. From actually the project happened in a community garden in Greenpoint, and then in the local library branch in that same neighborhood. And so there were these, two sites of where this took place. And it's not just that the art was in two places and you walk between the two of them to experience both if you wish, but also we had all this public programming that created tethers between the two spaces, whether it was the Deep Listening Sound Walk with Daniel Neumann, or the activism workshops that we did both in the garden and some of them in the library with local grassroots organizations, or the art making workshops that we also did for families. So it was having kind of these public spaces activated on a bunch of different levels. For that project, also engaging and talking to residents of that neighborhood. So kind of working in the public sphere was also like part of the making of it, as I was working with Nicholas Hoynes, a sociology PhD student, to um, figure out how to approach the topic of single-use culture and throwaway culture through like the methodologies of sociology. And so I was, talking to people, and being outside and walking, throughout the making of this. So I think, this idea of like, of, of of developing the project in these different realms, not just in the studio, but like in the public, and like, and outside in the city, um, with people from other disciplines and with just, residents in general, that definitely is something that flows through these two public art projects. Yeah.
I wanted to say that the tree care workshop was one of my favorite days, but then everything that happened around a more perfect circle was also a perfect day. Every engagement, every workshop. So you have a talent for for creating those beautiful experiences and creating them outdoors, which is incredible. I want to ask more about a more perfect circle, and about that coffee cup, and what did make the coffee cup object the right entry point into the conversation about the circular economy.
Great question. I think that I'm really drawn to, I find myself time and again drawn to objects or places or systems that can be overlooked or relegated to like the background or the margins. Um, and the cup itself is like kind of the epitome of that. It's an object that is very much woven into our daily life. It's, something that a lot of us buy regularly, our daily cup of coffee. We purchase it, we hold it, we put our lips to it and sip from it. We own it briefly, and then we toss it away. And then it starts its circulation in the world. And at the same time, it is such an invisible, um, it's designed to be invisible. It's designed like to be very simple and basically kind of really kind of for us, for the human mind and I think to tune it out. Um, and it is, very much kind of a design that is based on this, on the circularity of, on the circle, which is something that I think often about this is a bit of a tangent, so I'll come back to the other thing in a minute. But I think a lot about, the legacies of like abstraction and this utopian fantasy of like a world where there's a universal language and everything works and everything is in harmony. And the legacies of plastic, which are very dystopian, where, plastic is everywhere and that is the universal language. And that is the thing that you can find, in the deepest place in the world and at the tallest place or the highest place in the world, in our bodies and in the air. And it's just this kind of um, material that permeates everything. And these plastic lined cups are kind of a vehicle for this material, and just this idea of like, single use and throwaway that really fascinated me. These objects are, um, they're woven into our daily life and routines, into our rituals, um, and I think they're worth paying attention to. I think they're worth spending time with. I mean, I also spend a lot of time with bottle caps and like finger loops of beverage cartons. So maybe you don't want to take advice from me on that. Um, but I do find these kinds of like, ends and bits of pieces of objects that are designed to be used very briefly and then tossed away. Um, very, very interesting exactly because the ownership is so brief. The value that we assign to them is so minimal to non-existent. And yet they, I think, reflect a lot about, our culture, our, discard systems. Um, the cup is also, it's two-dimensional. It's made out of two-dimensional templates and then formed into a three-dimensional shape. And so, and that way, I was, kind of interested in this object that's very simple on a formal level. It's stackable. It's kind of lends itself to seriality in a very in kind of an easy way. Um, and it's just an object that I kind of found myself having to use again during the pandemic because I couldn't bring my, reusable cup anymore. And that's when I decided that that's it. They're staying with me. I'm not throwing them away. They're going to move to the studio, stay in the studio. I'm going to stop kind of that system of discarding there and just keep them and amass them in the studio and start engaging with them on like an aesthetic level and a formal level and on a material level and see what I can come up with. And so this decision to bring it into the studio space and then into this kind of the space of art making in the space of like experiencing art um, was a conscious decision is to elevate this object and the materials it is made out of um, from nearly nothing to something that we're going to spend a significant amount of time with and also kind of design programming around that kind of really um, appealed to me. This new way of balancing, following the stream of the cup, um, is very interesting. Also because it has like this very, it illustrates a very neatly, like the cup from moments of um, material extraction, raw material extraction to production to consumption when it moves. It's being shipped to the coffee shop and then bought by you or me, then to the wastebasket, and then taken to like, carted and shipped to the landfill, and then, maybe sold to another country or starting to disintegrate there and eventually breaking down and embedding itself into in the soil, the water, the air, and our bodies at the end. Um, so yeah, that's part of the motive, the kind of the motivation or the engine for working on this project is to make um, a deeply research project that takes that I'm going to invest a lot of time and a lot of kind of my thinking and studio time with to give that to something very small and kind of almost like banal or um yes, semi-invisible. Yeah, just something about it that rings really true to me.
That's very interesting what you said about how they're designed to be invisible, and in a way you're mimicking that in your work, that they seem so um, banal and just we discredit them, but there's this big industry behind it, and you also did all this work around that single use coffee cup. And to continue about this project, I have a question about the intellectual process of sociological research, and how did that inform each other with the material process of you working in clay to create the final product. I want to say, but the final work.
um yeah, so I can say a couple of things about that. The research, the research phase, like, which is basically, started with talking to Nicholas Hoynes, to Nick Hoynes, really allowed me to spend some time talking to someone who comes to this from a different discipline, and a different set of tools, and really nerd out about throwaway culture. We met a lot and talked a lot about this, and I could learn a lot from him because this is kind of his field of scholarship. um and it was interesting, to have that kind of back and forth between, there's like, the set of tools from, sociology, and how do you gather information, and then how do you, synthesize and analyze that information. Um, and the set of tools that are in the studio is how do you, it's a different kind of, way of working and developing a relationship, and a body of, another type of knowledge. So it definitely augmented my knowledge about the topic, but also kind of was interesting to learn how a body of knowledge is created. And there was this very playful back and forth between what's happening, um, with my, research work with Nick, and then, also avenues that other reading that I'd done, and other avenues that I explored, and obviously the data that I collected through my, conversations and surveys. And also, so, that playfulness between that and what's actually happening, in the studio. And, also, some, kind of like certain things happen that I kind of set rules for the game of how we're going to do this, but then certain things happen that are not planned or expected. Um, and that is where I think the work really kind of starts to breathe in some way. Is how, some of these columns of cups, or like, endless columns of cups, they kind of started having this more formal conversation with like the data visualization that we did with with the surveys. And so there's so I was using the data from the surveys to also create like certain pieces, but also these kinds of like reverberations started happening, which was kind of interesting, and really kind of, fleshed out, like thickened, I think, like the web manifestations of the project. The other thing is that, there is a gargantuan system of like wasting and managing waste that is also largely invisible to us, is like, where does all this trash and refuse go to? Um, and that I think is super interesting. And that is also something that we talked about a bunch, is how well it is hidden, how well it has been normalized, so we don't really think about where it goes once we release it from our hand. Um, and where does it go? So just kind of seeing the systems or the anatomy behind the simple like habit of buying a cup of coffee on the go, and like all these layers, that are huge and intricate, that are behind it.
Many of your projects, and especially the public engagement pieces, have a form or take a form of collaboration, and sometimes it's with humans and scientists, and sometimes it's with nature. But I wanted to ask you now, again, about the City of Trees and about Anna Atkins, because the series was inspired by the 19th century artist and scientist Anna Atkins. What inspires you about this historical figure?
Many things. She is she's the was probably the first woman photographer. She is the first person to publish a photography book. She was a scientist, a botanist, and a creative person. So she kind of dedicated her life to these pursuits. She was the daughter of her father was a chemist, a mineralogist, and a zoologist. So she had this very unusual upbringing for, a young lady of her time. Um, and I just found the way like science and creativity are, and just, making and process. So this like engagement with materials of this very like wholehearted way. Um, I found that super inspiring, is that it really kind of distills curiosity to me, like her work. I know we see it now through like a lot of cultural revisitation and commercialization, but if you just go to the originals themselves, they're incredible, and they are like a moment in time in art and science, are very much intertwined, which is, I think, in the 19th century, photography is exactly that. Like, it's science, it's art, it's figuring out what it is. And there's just like this appetite for experimenting and trying things out, and that is beautiful. Um, her, the Samatide process I really love because it's very slow. It's very unmediated compared to other photography processes because there's no camera involved. The way you measure time when you work with it is has to do so much more like with the seasons and day. So when you work with cameras, usually measuring things in like fractions of a second. When you print outdoors like I was doing with cyanotype, it's on a summer's day, maybe it's like 50, it could be a 15-second exposure. On a winter's day, it could be 10 minutes. That's really slow for like a photographic process. And it really kind of measures time much more as how, me and my body and my brain measure time. And there's a real beauty to that. And not only that, time changes depending on where you are in the city. Like if there, what's the architecture around you. And so I really I'm not a very organized person. And I kind of wanted to really go with that. And so, it's not like I kept notes on like, I kept mental notes. But I kind of had a sense is that as I was printing these over the year, it's fall, it's 3 p.m., it's the season, the time of day, and where you are and the location. And like, it's fall, 3 p.m., and I'm on this street corner. I think it'll take me about 8 minutes. Um, and so there's a real, kind of very tactile juiciness to that process that I really, really like. And um, is I think, you don't have that easily with other photographic processes. Yeah. And her as a primary, resource or an inspiration, the prints themselves are incredible. And so when you go back to them and look at them, I think it really kind of takes you. And it's one of the reasons why I thought it would be kind of, cool to think about, New York City and the plants that grow here, the trees that grow here, and this online, map, through this very like tactile way of making, through like Anna Atkins, a way of like engaging with, with plants.
And what's a through line in your work, even if the medium changes?
Um, so, I do work, my work flows from like, different media through, sculpture and collage and works on paper, ceramics. I love working with found materials and objects as they always kind of find their way into my studio and into the the things that I make. And I work in large scale public art projects all the way into like intimate small pieces that you're meant to like hold in your hand. Um, but I think there's a sensibility that definitely runs throughout. And, I can think of a few things. Like one is, this idea of reciprocity and the action of reciprocity. So whether it's, um, you know, the act of drawing breath. It has from Out of Thin Air, a public art piece that's based on this foundational act of like drawing breath and breathing in and breathing out, or this feeling of breathlessness. That is a kind of reciprocity with the world. We breathe the world and the world breathes us in some way. It's another kind of, air is a commons, and I'm very interested in the commons. Um, and I come back to that, like the common free space or place, or material that, like that, should be, should be ours, that cares for us, and we, should be caring for it in return. Um, Back to the reciprocity, that is a one example, but also, you know, engaging with like other people from other disciplines, other species, like dogs. um, other participants that are not necessarily, professionals or like academics or art world people. So just kind of, residents or people from the community, activists, and like grassroots organizations. Um, it's very much this idea of like keeping a conversation going, keeping it fairly open ended, and sustaining it. That's something that I'm really interested. I think I'm really interested in process and materials, um, and also kind of maintaining a certain level of experimentation, even if a project is big, is to still have an element of experimentation and open endedness, so as to keep it, I think, you know breathing and open to surprises, and definitely an element of like really appreciating and giving a lot of space for play, and for that's something that I think really kind of weaves through, and as like, kind of coming back to things that are the overlooked, the under, kind of the somewhat illegible. I think I really come back to that a lot, whether it's a space. We have like amazing communal spaces in the city, like, libraries, or, maybe community gardens that we walk by every day and don't necessarily go in or like think about all the cultural back and forth that goes in those places. We don't really think of these places as cultural places, but I firmly believe that that they're really vibrant cultural places. It's not glamorous, but they're really vibrant and really interesting. Um, and so, this through line of, whether it's an object or space, or, yeah, or like a way of communicating and reciprocating. I think it's something that I'll always come back to, is kind of really attending to it and giving it the attention at a time that I think it deserves, and see what else is there that I can find.
That does make me think of nature, but that might also be because of my next question. And your work in general, but what is something about environmental art and environmental activism that you think people still misunderstand or underestimate?
Mm, that's a tough one. I have to think about it some more, but I think I think we all engage with environmental things because we cared deeply. But I also think it's important to remember that raising awareness is very different than taking action. And there's a lot of people and organizations are made out of people, that are doing that, have a huge body of knowledge, a history, that they, are working really hard and in very interesting ways to bring specific, you know, specific campaigns into and campaign goals into reality, help pass specific laws and legislation, regulations. So specificity, I think there are specific things that need to be done for change to happen. And that's a different sphere. And I feel like we should all be supporting it. And I think we should be talking to people from these spaces and collaborating with them. Um, and I think that when the other thing to remember is that it's not just is the action is it's collective. So no one can change anything on their own. It's really about, reaching to the people, on your left and on your right, like, and finding that, common cause, and really, joining hands, and, focusing on what it is that you want to change. We are not going to be able to change anything, one person at a time. And that's like a really powerful thing, that we want to embrace and not lose sight of. And that's what, whenever possible, I try with my public art project. So is always to bring in, um, the grassroots organizations around me and really kind of highlight and support whatever campaigns they are working on. Um, and of course, I think it's very exciting for people to find out more about these, things, whether you're really passionate about compost and universal composting, or you're really passionate about, marine life and, cleaner beaches and or plastics, or global warming. There's so many things that you could tap into, and also in different levels, like levels of commitment. No one needs to be like perfect about it. Just if everyone just does a little, that's what's going to make the huge difference. And we have to really kind of, whether you look at it from like the consumer point of view or the artistic point of view, is, hold others' hands, bring others with you, because alone, it's change doesn't happen alone. It happens in a collective.
Yeah, new projects do inspire collective action, and that also is embedded in many of the activities that you do around your work. Do you have anything else you would like to talk about? I'm out of questions.
I guess I can share a little bit about the project I'm
Yes,
working on now.
please.
So this is a project that I'm very excited about and started to work on, develop at the Wave Hill Winter Residency. Wave Hill also showed City of Trees, so it was a really beautiful culmination of this project. In their show Trees New York, Trees We Breathe. And so this project revolves around thinking about play and creativity in non-humans, so other animals. And when I was at Wave Hill, I really focused on play behaviors on that animals that kind of live in Wave Hill might display, so mostly squirrels, and birds, and just kind of learning more about what their vocabulary is. So I really kind of think about, play as kind of language, and animals, just like us, can be very creative. And that really shows itself in their playful behaviors and how they engage with the world through play, how they build bonds through play, how they build communities, and even like practice, justice and fairness through play. So many things that, humans do as well happen, and, on a community level and on an individual level in animals. And that has really captured my imagination. And so I'm working on kind of developing some sort of visual system or array of that kind of gives life and shape and form to these play vocabularies that you can see all around you, if you stopped to look.
That's wonderful to hear, and Waco is such a perfect setting for that. Thank you so much, Sari. So great to speak with you, and thank you for sharing about your very interesting next project that's in progress.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you.